So as I'm sure you've seen, basically interim president of Venezuela, Juan Guaido, who, it's kind of like they're just making up these laws as they go. Like, CNN is pushing this theory that by Venezuela's constitution, Juan Guaido is now the president because the election last year was not fair or was a scam, even though Nicolas Maduro was elected for the first time many, many years ago, not last year, and by all election observers, including the Carter Center, it was a free and fair election. Nicolas Maduro didn't even have to hold an election last year. The actual presidential, by the dates, the presidential election was supposed to be this year in Venezuela, but Maduro, such a dictator, agreed to hold it a year early. That's not exactly. Do you think Trump would be like, yeah, I'll hold the election in 2019 if there's enough outcry? Of course not. I think this Ben Norton tweet says it all. Ben Norton has been in Venezuela reporting. I think he's in Caracas right now. Oh, no, he's in Bogota, Colombia. The U.S. government is openly supporting the violent military coup attempt in Venezuela. The U.S. was also behind the failed 2002 military coup against elected President Hugo Chavez. This time, the Trump administration is not even trying to hide it. Couldn't agree more. You got Glenn Greenwald talking about Debbie Wasserman Schultz, that wonderful progressive Debbie Wasserman Schultz, and Donna Shalala, another Florida hack. Two of the most outspoken politicians supporting the Trump administration's regime change efforts in Venezuela have been Debbie Wasserman Schultz and Donna Shalala. This tweet deceitfully tries to claim the Trump administration is siding with Maduro, but that's an obvious lie. Dems stand with Trump. He's responding to a tweet by Florida Democrats, which Debbie Wasserman Schultz runs everything down there. So that's the beauty in America, right? If you're a black person and you breathe, you go to jail, right? If you're a Native American and you breathe or protest, you get your head bashed in. Same goes for brown people. Now, if you're poor and white and you say a word, you're protest, you could get beat up and get thrown in jail. Debbie Wasserman Schultz, you rig an election, you have to resign in disgrace. You get backbenched for like 5 minutes, and now you can come forward again. And that all is well. There's no penalty for Debbie Wasserman Schultz. And now she's pushing an armed coup of the Venezuelan government, essentially aided by the United States. Here is John Bolton, this peaceful man, so worried about giving the humanitarian aid the Venezuelan people need. Here's John Bolton describing the coup, or clearly not a coup in his words, that the United States is essentially the shadow puppets behind.
Well, Juan Guaido is out on the streets of Caracas now. He's rallying the people. He's called for the people to come out, and they are increasingly on the streets. As I think many of you know, there were mass demonstrations planned for tomorrow. The circumstances of what's happened today in Caracas have called people out all over the country. So Guaido is behaving in the same courageous way he and other figures in the opposition have these last 3 months. We know that over 40 people have been killed by the Maduro regime in the course of these protests. This is an act of bravery by Guaido and others, really for the freedom of the Venezuelan people.
What happens if Guaido is not able to take power? What's the next step?
Well, I think it's possible this situation could persist. I think the people have shown they're prepared to protect Guaido. We don't see any indication that there's any substantial part of the military that's ready to fire on innocent civilians, their fellow countrymen. We know that the Cuban organized colectivos, these thugs, these motorcycle gangs that the Cubans have put together, are out protecting certain buildings controlled by Maduro, not the military, but the colectivos. This really demonstrates the depths to which the Maduro regime has sunk, that they're using these Cuban-directed thugs to conduct their affairs. And it's one reason why I think there's such overwhelming public support for Guaido. It needs to be translated into a transition of power.
Ambassador, President.
Is the U.S. prepared to use any option, including a military option, to support Guaido?
Let me say two things to be very clear. Number one, we want as our principal objective the peaceful transfer of power. But I will say again, as the President has said from the outset, and that Nicolas Maduro and those supporting him, particularly those who are not Venezuelan, should know is all options are on the table.
Where do you start with this John Bolton? John Bolton standing in front of a camera talking about peaceful transitions, caring about, the act Juan Guaido is, exerting bravery in search of in a quest for the freedom of the Venezuelan people. I'm trying to think of the best analogy. I mean, this would be like, Dick Cheney selling Boy Scout and Girl Scout cookies. I mean, John Bolton is about as believable as my left toe, if that makes any sense. And it's so egregious. First of all, when they say, President Trump wants the peaceful transition of government from, Maduro to Guaido. Well, peaceful transitions, the definition of that is elections. When one side wins and one side loses, and the losing side peacefully transitions power to the winning side. That's peaceful transition. This is a coup, even though Bolton laughably said, clearly not a coup. Well, what do you call this? Because every objective person says Juan Guaido announcing himself as the interim president of Venezuela would be like after the Mueller report or after something damaging to Trump, Nancy Pelosi declaring herself president of the United States. Nancy Pelosi as president of the United States would be pretty horrifying. I think most of you would agree. But they don't have to like Nicolas Maduro. And I don't know enough about Venezuelan politics to say whether Maduro is good, bad. I know people I trust like Ben Norton, Ron Yakalek, Glenn Greenwald have all conceded that he has not always done the right thing economically for the Venezuelan people. But to say this, to paint him as a dictator, there's no difference between Nicolas Maduro and Mohammed bin Salman, King Abdullah of Jordan, Saddam Hussein, when we were cozying up to him before he became a problem. The problem is Maduro doesn't want to hand over the largest oil reserves in the world to United States oil companies. That's what all of this is about. Getting rid of him, putting in a puppet, Juan Guaido, because that's what he is, a puppet. And by the way, all you got to do is read up on it. He's an extreme puppet. He is a radical right-winger who wants to privatize Venezuela's public resources and privatize them all. Sound familiar? Sound familiar? And, John Bolton talking about, I wrote it down, freedom for the Venezuelan people. Well, Aaron Maté, who's a good journalist, Ben Norton, who's a good journalist, Max Blumenthal, who's a good journalist, they've all been in Venezuela in recent weeks, and I've seen some of their interviews. It doesn't seem to me that the people they're speaking to are lacking freedom. Max Blumenthal has gone through markets, food markets, that show low prices, partially because of the Maduro government. So, are there parts of Venezuela that are struggling? Yes. Are there parts of Venezuela that are in serious economic despair? Yes. Is Maduro perfect? No. But you don't, as a country, and of course we're not a country, we're the United Corporations of America, which I always say, you don't go in there and say, well, basically they're trying to paint Maduro as not the leader, not the democratically elected leader. This dictator, this brutal man, he needs to gracefully exit and insert the rightful president, Juan Guaido. This is about as phony as you could possibly get. It's military-industrial complex, plus regime change, plus fossil fuel fuckery. I mean, it's laughable. And by the way, this is happening. This is happening. I want to show you this article because, frankly, well, what happened last time for the purpose of humanitarian aid? What happened last time we did this in Libya? Oh, who's this? Who is Khalifa Haftar, whose forces are attacking Tripoli, Libya? Libya's latest upheaval comes at the hands of a mustached military strongman who lived in the U.S. for 20 years, has past links with the CIA, and recently spoke on the phone with President Donald Trump about their, quote, shared vision for the country. The North African nation has been divided, lawless, and verging on becoming a failed state ever since NATO intervention, including American airstrikes, helped topple dictator Muammar Gaddafi in 2011. Oh, you know who is for these airstrikes and, intervention? Of course, President Obama. Of course, Hillary Clinton. Who's that guy that CNN claims is the overwhelming frontrunner? Joe Biden? Same Joe Biden who said this?
Considered in the context of the President's speech this week and his address last month to the United Nations General Assembly, this resolution, though still imperfect, deserves our support, and let me explain why. First, the objective is more clearly and carefully stated. The objective is to compel Iraq to destroy its illegal weapons of mass destruction and its programs to develop and produce missiles and more of those weapons. President Bush did not lash out precipitously in Iraq after 9/11. He did not snub the UN or our allies. He did not dismiss new inspection regimes. He did not ignore Congress. At each pivotal moment, he has chosen a course of moderation and deliberation, and I believe he will continue to do so. At least that is my fervent hope. I wish he would turn down the rhetorical excess in some cases, because I think it undercuts the decision he ends up making. But in each case, in my view, he has made the right, rational, and calm, deliberate decision.
Woo, child. So that's Senator Joe Biden basically fluffing President Bush's pillows in the build-up to the Iraq War. Woo, man. Woo. Saying George W. Bush was moderate and deliberate. I don't want to get too much on Biden because we're going to get to that in a bit. But, exactly what we're trying to do in Venezuela right now. We just did this several years ago when it came to Libya. And Libya has become not only a disaster with equally, if not worse, terrorists running it than Muammar Gaddafi, but Libya has an open slave trade now. This because of the United States and our humanitarian desire to free the people of Libya. Hillary Clinton, that's all she wanted, just free the people of Libya. Just like the Clintons went into Haiti to help with post-earthquake relief and then made gobbles and gobbles of money off of it. I mean, it's astounding if you read up on Libya. Two rival governments continue to claim power in a country destabilized by warring militias and Islamist fighters. Amid the chaos, experienced warlord Khalifa Haftar earlier this month launched an offensive on the capital, Tripoli, where the internationally recognized government is based. It is the latest development in bewilderingly complex crisis where several groups are vying for control, but with little sign of resolution. Quote, a morally bankrupt elite is engaged in a zero-sum game for absolute power, said Tariq Magharesi, a policy fellow at the European Council on Foreign Relations. Think Game of Thrones, where every house is ruled by Joffrey. Woo! That's bad if you know Game of Thrones. Joffrey. He's a real son of a gun. Now, I say this because really what the United States is doing in the case of Venezuela, just like it did with Libya, just like it did in Iran, in the case of Mossadegh in the 1950s, just like it's done in Pakistan and Peru and many other places. We don't particularly care about the people in these countries. We don't particularly care what happens after. We don't really care who the leader is, per se, as long as they do what the United States wants. It is a get in and get out operation. Get in, take the resources, privatize the country, and then, maybe, 10 years later, maybe they'll, in retrospect, maybe we shouldn't have done that. And then redo it all over again in another country. And in Bolton's ridiculous comments, by the way, somebody needs to call the 1950s and 60s back and say, and you know, we want our, you know, ranting and propagandizing about Cuba back. I mean, the administration is literally pushing the same propaganda about Cuba as has been United States fear-mongering in the 60s and 70s and 80s and 90s, 2000s. I mean, at least Obama did that right, trying to normalize relations with Cuba, which Trump, of course, reversed. So I don't know how much clearer it could get. I mean, the United States is literally at the helm. Juan Guaido's resistance and controlled opposition is in many parts, if you look at the financial connections which Max Blumenthal, Ben Norton has at the Gray Zone, I would recommend you reading their work at the Gray Zone. A lot of it's funded by the U.S. State Department and the Defense Department. So this is United States funded and trained opposition, basically toppling the democratically elected leader of Venezuela. When they say, they always say, oh, they wanted a sham election, they're not legitimate. Well, you know, free and all these observers and all these organizations that monitor elections around the world said when he was first elected, it was free and fair. They tried this, as Ben Norton pointed out, with Hugo Chavez's elections. So, you know, full disclosure, I reached out to Tulsi Gabbard's campaign this morning to try and get a quick interview with her on this because I think this requires presidential leadership. In full fairness, partially because I just landed last night and I was trying to cram so much in this afternoon while still doing this live stream, I haven't even looked to see if Bernie Sanders has said anything about this. Tulsi Gabbard has said anything about this. That's my bad. I just haven't had time to look as I was doing 25 things at once. So Tulsi has spoken out very strongly on this in the past, in the not so recent past. Bernie Sanders has kind of said, you know, he's been on both sides. He said, well, the United States should not be in the business of regime change, but Maduro is a dictator and blah, 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 blah. So in the past, I don't think Bernie's statements were as strong as Tulsi's. I don't know what either has said today. When I know, I'll do a follow-up. So we'll follow up on this. And I've reached out to Ben Norton to try and get an interview. I believe he is in Colombia right now, so he might not be available to do that interview right now, but I'll keep trying, even if it's on the phone, because we need the experts on the ground there to actually tell you what's actually going on. Because CNN, I mean, if you watch it, it is like real-time propaganda. Like, instead of having producers in their ear in the control room, they literally have CIA officials telling them what to say. It's embarrassing. It's embarrassing.
Hope you enjoyed that last video. Hop on over to statuscoup.com where you can sign up for our email list and become a member for as low as $5 to $10 a month. Membership is how we grow. That's statuscoup.com/join. And remember, join our email list so we can grow the revolution with you.